What is the absolute stupidest thing you've ever heard at work? Before we get started, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and turn on the bell so you don't miss future videos. Thanks for the support. Worked for a supermarket chain ordering fresh foods. We had a problem with one of the fresh soup suppliers where it kept being delivered frozen. The account manager assured us that they would monitor the production line and make sure none of it came out colder than -2 degrees Celsius, the design spec. The next batch came in frozen solid. When we asked her what went wrong, she proudly claimed she'd measured it and it was -8 degrees Celsius, which is warmer than -2 degrees Celsius, as 8 is a bigger number. 7,000 of soup went in the bin that day. Just spoke to an old colleague of mine. The reason why it was rejected was below -2 degrees Celsius. The pots would start to split and pop the lids off. So when unloading at depots, there was the start of a waterfall of chunky veg and cream of chicken dripping out of pallets. When the soup came off the production line, it was blast chilled to cool it, readied it for shipping. -2 degrees Celsius was the coldest they can cool it to without risk of this happening. Next story, I worked in printing, and paper is weighed by GSM. The higher the number, the thicker the paper. A lady I worked with was on the phone to the printers and kept pronouncing it jism. She then stood up and shouted across the office to me, "I'm on the phone to the printers. I want them to give me heavier jism. How much jism do we want?" Had to pull her aside and she was absolutely mortified. I was dying. Next story, not technically at work as I was sitting outside on a break with a can of Monster, other energy drinks are available, when one of my colleagues told me I shouldn't put that in your body, it's really bad for you, as she walked past puffing on a fag. I mean, she technically wasn't wrong, but the irony stunned me. Next story, worked in a fine dining restaurant. One evening, while taking a table's order, I asked them if there were any food allergies or dietary requirements we should be aware of. Guest looks me square in the eyes and replies, "I'm allergic to cats." I stared at her for like a minute, trying to figure out if she was taking the piss. But nope, she's 100% serious. Even her friend looked at her to see if she was messing about. I toyed with the idea of telling her not to order a certain main course, but in the end, thought it would backfire on me. I left the table and went straight through to the kitchen, laughing my ass off. Next story, working on a deli counter at Sainsbury's, a customer asks for a full block of cheddar, around 2 kilos, probably 20 pounds. She doesn't like the price, so asks me if it would be cheaper if I grate it all for her. First, was hard to keep a straight face and explain that the weight, and therefore price, wouldn't change. Next story, I left my mic on in a 6-way conversation with my boss and operations manager and said some mean words about her, the operations manager. Had to quit, really. Next story, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, I've had users ask me for a second laptop so they can take one home and leave one their desk. Try to use a mouse with it rotated 90 degrees, so the wire is coming out of the side, then complain that that's not how you use a mouse, when we tried to explain the correct way to hold it. Call it support for air conditioning to hot-cold, the office kettle not working, the door to their building being difficult to open, a request for a new microwave. So many tickets that say things like, PC doesn't. When Wi-Fi was becoming a thing, a VIP user called me at 1 a.m. because he couldn't connect to the Wi-Fi. When I asked him what building he was in, he told me he was on holiday and wouldn't accept that the company Wi-Fi wasn't available anywhere in the world. Next story, I used to work in risk for a high street lender, but over time, I became more and more worried about the systems and people working there. One day, someone entirely seriously asked, "Quick question, can children apply for a loan?" Couldn't believe someone who'd been working in finance for years would ask such a question. I stood up in despair without answering, updated my CV, and no longer worked there the following month. Next story, I was on a first aid course with work. The teacher asked a question about if someone was in anaphylactic shock from eating a peanut and you had an EpiPen, what would you do? This girl I work with said that she would snap the syringe in half and pour the contents into the person's mouth. Next story, I bought one of your phones but it needs replacing. I'm sorry to hear that. What's wrong with it? The screen's too dark when I have my sunglasses on. Next story. A woman working as my supervisor in a role related to childcare swore infections, viruses, and bacteria were 3 completely different things. As my weeping conjunctivitis was an infection, it could not be spread to the 6-month-olds, and I must come in to handle the babies, no matter what my stupid leash says. 3 months later, I had chickenpox and almost died, but that stupid little cow told me to come in and handle the babies. Next story. Dealing with subcontractors, we issued an update to our terms and conditions to add in clauses explicitly forbidding the use of modern slavery, bribery, and fraud, standard legalese. Clauses that are in law anyway, but you add them into contracts to really emphasize them. We had one contractor come back and claim, and I quote, "We find the request an infringement of our customer, basic human rights of privacy, and to say the least, onerous for us as a company. To use this as leverage. To adhere to the contract or lose work is not acceptable to us. We find it morally wrong that you should attempt to control and repress your workforce in this unreasonable manner." Well, okay then, toddle off somewhere else with your slaves in that case. Next story, from an employee. It's a well-known fact that the sun revolves around the earth. From a customer. Do you have hair underneath your armpits? If you do, singe them, because you're a twat. 6 years later, and I'm still baffled by that one. Next story. At a meeting to discuss efficiency savings, etc., I asked what percentage of any savings we would get. "Oh, it doesn't work like that. It's to make everybody's life easier and help the company," I reply. "But we were told in a meeting about 18 months ago we would get rewarded for any savings made. That's never been a thing. What fool told you that?" "You did." Next story. So I work with electronic forms. Data gets put on forms from database. Forms are printed, sent out to customers. Client is unhappy with the current design of the form. There's not enough room in one of the boxes if the data is particularly long, like if someone has a very long name. Okay, so we make the box bigger. No, you cannot make the box bigger. Okay, so we make the font smaller. No, you cannot make the font smaller. Okay, so we use a narrower font from the same family. No, it must be the same font. Okay. So we arrange it so that if the input is very long, it gets split over 2 lines and squeezed into the box that way. No, the data has to be on 1 line. What else do you think I can change, you imbecile? Next story. A woman who was paid a significant amount of money to be an IT project manager, cutting a watermelon sideways with a bread knife, using her hand to stabilize it on top of her very expensive Mac. Her Mac was ruined later after she took it into the shower to play music with her. She also couldn't chew her food. She'd swallow it whole like a snake. I had to interrupt more than one meeting to give her the Heimlich, nice woman otherwise. Next story. Not something I heard, but something I watched. A few years ago, I was working in a McDonald's kitchen. We were experiencing a large number of new starters due to high turnover, mostly because the store manager was awful. It's 7 a.m., and it's our last hour before the store picks up traffic. Me and 2 of my friends, colleagues, are wrapping up our setup when a new girl walks in. She sheepishly stands at the back and washes her hands, while the manager introduces her. Eventually, she is told to put a hairnet on. Important to note is that hairnets come on a little metal ring that hold like 60 hairnets. This girl, who I assume was just nervous, puts the ring on her head and tries to pull all 60 over her head. The 3 of us all watched in disbelief at the time and found it fairly funny. Girl later went on to be fairly good at her job. Glad for her. Next story, painted on a film set. Spent 3 weeks painting one wall, as instructed, to be very aged and metal, only for them to point the camera in the opposite direction. Same art director, "Can you make it look less wet? The paint will dry, and in an hour, it will look good. Make it dry now." Okay, it looks too dry. Next story, working in a now defunct electrical retailer that rhymes with grommet. Customer comes in, marches right up to me standing at the camera display, and says with a straight face, "Don't look at me like I'm a space alien, but do you have a camera that takes a picture of your aura?" I said we didn't, but she might have better luck in Jessup's. Next story. In 2001, I discovered a security bug and reported it to the vendor. My job was security reporting. 9 years later, with the patch still not widely applied in our company, my manager tells me the bug doesn't even exist. There are a lot of stupid things, but that probably takes top spot. Next story. My boomer boss asked me how he could take some files and have them on his desktop. I told him he could copy and paste them. Blank. Stare. What's that? This guy was easily earning 7 times my salary. Next story. I used to work at that very popular, bright red, second-hand phone shop. You know the one. This guy comes in with a laptop and goes, "Hello, I'd like to return this laptop, please. None of the ports work. I can't charge it or plug USB in or anything." I take it and say, "Oh, that's a shame. I'm sorry. Let me get it booked in for a warranty test." I fill in all the boring paperwork and take it to the testing area behind the tills, and I take a closer look, and I see every single port is jam-packed full of soil. The charger port, the USB ports, the fan vents, every single hole on this man's laptop is stuffed full of soil. I go back to him and say, "I'm sorry, sir. I can't offer you a warranty on this. The ports aren't working because they are all full of soil, and I'm afraid that voids the warranty." And he looks me dead in the eyes and says, "Of course it's full of soil. It's been in my bag." And he takes off his backpack, opens it, and shows me it is full of loose soil and a single purple flower. He takes back the laptop and storms off. Next story. I work in a biochemistry laboratory with an endocrine section. One of the registered scientists I work with didn't know what menopause is. Next story. I'm a radiographer. I asked a patient to fill her bladder for a scan. I told her she had to have a full bladder and couldn't go to the toilet. When she came in for the examination, her bladder was empty. I asked, "Why have you emptied your bladder?" She replied indignantly, "I only had a wee." I had to explain step by step that having a wee entailed emptying your wee from your bladder into the toilet, therefore emptying your bladder. And the wee that was once in her bladder, where it was needed for that test, was now in the toilet. She looked at me like a significant light bulb eureka moment had just popped off in her cerebral cortex. "Oh, sorry, I get it now," she said wide-eyed. Next story. You're not contracted to work 30 hours. You're contracted to work for however long we need you, is words coming directly from my ex-boss's mouth. Despite my contract clearly stating 30-hour work weeks with flexibility for occasional overtime when needed, was being forced to work 50 to 60-hour weeks in a toxic environment, which inevitably took its toll on my mental health. Been out of that place since January, and I'm now still paying the consequences of working there. Next story, my favorite. A lovely girl who wasn't all that smart once asked me if Poland was in Sweden. I explained that they were entirely different countries, with the help of a map, and she spent a lovely afternoon looking it over. The best of her exclamations was, "Oh, Vietnam's a real place. I thought they made it up for the films." Next story. A colleague measuring out cable, sold by the meter, in front of a customer, against a measuring tape, and running it to around 91 centimeters whilst counting off each meter. The impeccable logic? 3 feet a meter, mate. Arguments ensued. There was literally a 1 meter mark a bit further up the tape that the customer, my other colleagues, and I all pointed to, but this brainiac wasn't having any of it. We could have filled a book with the idiotic things this guy did, but alas, it never happened. Next story. Was interviewing candidates for a sales position. Got a batch of CVS that weren't particularly brilliant. One candidate, whose name was James, had spelt his name James. Next story. I work in HR, so have tons of stories. My favorites are, "Why did you deduct 600 pounds from my salary? Refund it instantly. Sir, that's your tax." Next story. I worked at a very busy historical site with a huge sign in the front declaring which site and city it is. And we constantly had tourists asking us which city they were in. Next story. I'm a female Sparky, electrician, and I'm contracting at a factory today where a male member of staff just said, "Oh, are you one of those independent women Beyoncé is always on about?" To make it even worse, he then followed me around for 5 minutes asking me questions to see if he could trip me up while I'm trying to do my job. He even asked if I understood the difference between single-phase and 3-phase plugs, which is like asking a professional dancer if they know the difference between hip-hop and ballet. Stupid and incredibly sexist. Next story. Not stupid as such, but some fun gems from when I worked in a supermarket. Have you got any orgasmic runner beans? Where's the orgasm if brown bread? Same lady, different day. Is this duck sushi vegetarian? Also props to a fellow looking for black pudding in the in-store bakery, assuming it was a dessert. He was in for a shock. Next story. Patient told me she didn't want to take the vaccine because she didn't know what was in it. Reason she was in hospital. Cardiac arrest due to substances use. Next story. I used to work for an agency with a major United Kingdom bank as one of our clients. In a big meeting, one of their senior execs asked why we couldn't just put the bank in the cloud. Next story. Worked in a factory which built mobile phones. A middle manager once explained to the directors that the line was not producing the figures expected because there was an issue with the flux capacitor. Next story. A lad I once worked with asked me, "If I boil the kettle twice, will it be twice as hot?" That was 6 years ago, and I still take the piss out of him for it. Next story. A warehouseman asked his apprentice to clean up some of the cardboard boxes that were lying around and take them out of the main floor of the warehouse. The apprentice refused, and so the warehouseman said, "Come on, it'll be character building." The apprentice said, "I don't even know where the character building is, so I can't do it." Next story. I used to work in a high street recruitment agency. We had an advert outside for refuse collectors which read, "Collecting refuse from curbside." A bloke came in and asked where curbside was and could he get there on a bus. Next story. I was in a house share with a HR grad from work. We were having a conversation over breakfast, and the topic of income tax came up. She was adamant that income tax was charged on your total salary, so when you went into the higher tax band, you actually earn less in total. Took me a little while to explain the concept of progressive tax bands. Next story. I used to work agency shifts at a care home, and there was a staff member there who took a bit of a dislike to me for some reason and was very critical of my work. She also considered herself to be the best worker ever because she had a disabled brother. Anyway, one of the residents was unable to communicate verbally. I came in one day and said hello to him. This woman snapped back at me, "He can't talk, you know." Over a decade later, it still strikes me as the stupidest thing I have ever heard at work in my life. Next story. I run a small data protection company, and one that we get all the time that you'll probably know all too well is, we don't share data with anyone at all. You then start looking at their processing and find they use 8 different third parties, a contractor, store their data, and have 100 cookies on their website being placed without any consent. Ow! We didn't know that was data sharing. Suddenly you're questioning why you quoted so little for the work, and whether or not you even want the client. Next story. 2 of my colleagues were discussing Thanksgiving and why it is celebrated. What is the point? Why don't we celebrate it, etc.? One of them turned to the other and confidently declared that the whole point in Thanksgiving is a practice run for Christmas, so they make sure Christmas dinner is perfect because they don't cook a lot of roasts in America. The other said, "Oh, no way. That makes a lot of sense." Next story. I need you to look at my laptop. It's not working properly. Okay, not a lot of info to go on. Can I look at it now? Oh, I didn't bring it in. It's at home. Next story. A woman at work made an anti-LGBTIQ slur. She was called out on it and said, "No, we Christians are the most persecuted people in the world." Aye, try telling that to gay people, you daft cow. She's so well liked, she later caught meningitis, now recovered, and hardly anyone wanted to send her flowers. Next story. I worked with a 40-year-old woman who declared in the staff room that her brother had given her a dozen eggs. She proceeded to say, "It's going to be a wild weekend in my house." When asked why, she declared, "I don't know how to boil an egg." She had zero sense of humor and was completely serious. Next story. I work in hospitals. Whilst checking a ward's emergency trolley, I was asked, by a clinical staff member, if the AED can be used to defibrillate. When I asked her to clarify, is she meant the automated external defibrillator, she said, yes. She was sent to repeat her BLS course. Next story. Fellow waiter, "Where is table 2? Replies on automatic because I'm busy, "It's next to table 3, okay?" And they walk off. They had all the puzzle pieces right there but couldn't solve the mystery on their own. Dude was from a rich family though, so I'm sure he's doing just fine now. Next story. Are we allowed to say anti-vax stuff, or is that still seen as a no-no? I'll do it anyway. The cleaning lady is anti-vax. Apparently years ago there was some horse vaccine and it made all the horses sick, so she doesn't trust vaccines. She went with the usual, "Well, it's obvious this COVID thing is blown out of proportion. I don't know anyone who's had it, and it's not like the vaccine is even guaranteed to stop. It's pointless to risk taking the vaccine in the first place, etc. That's not totally stupid. Yes, it's still very stupid, but nothing out of the ordinary for anti-vax types." But she followed up with an absolute kicker. "Anyway, my daughter has a severely compromised immune system, and she hasn't caught it. If anyone was to get it, she would." This was said in a proud Gothka tone. This woman's daughter, pretty sickly most of the time, and on top of that, has chronic fatigue syndrome. I dread to think what kind of effect COVID would have had on her, and that her caring mum is willing to literally risk the life of her daughter. Next story. We had a guy that refused to get vaccinated but would open all doors with his sleeve over his hand because he was paranoid about catching COVID from his vaccinated coworkers. Next story. There was a specific department in my old company that would always take a screenshot of Excel, etc., print it, scan it, and attach it to an email. You could tell them a million times that you could paste the screenshot. Nope. Same department? Switch to a print service. BW was just about 0 to print. Color prints weren't. Cannot remember how much. Printed out a ton of Excel stuff, a few words were blue, and a massive bill came in. I kid you not. Well, it's only a little color. It says here that's full color print is X per print. It's not full color. Next story. Being told I have to commute half an hour into the office so that the atmosphere is better, even though I worked remotely for 2 years with no issues. Next story. I was working in testing for a secure telecommunications company that ran the secure network police, fire, ambulance radios, all ran on SAT. Working away, and I can hear the colleague next to me swiping back and forth with his mouse over and over again. This goes on for maybe 5 minutes and was starting to get on my nerves. So I turned to him and asked what he's doing. I need to select all this log data. He has a log file with several 100,000 lines of data on it, and he is highlighting it by sweeping the mouse over it back and forth. This is a man with 30 years of experience, coming up on retirement, and he had never heard of Control+A until I told him about it. Next story. I work in customer service and had to write up a guide telling people how to shut down their laptops because they didn't realize just closing the laptop screen doesn't do that for them. Next story. I once had a coworker state that our mutual friend only ate with us at lunch socially. She said that because he was a bodybuilder, he didn't need to eat and only did it to look normal. When I asked her how he lives without eating, she replied, "He gets all the energy he needs from the sun. He's not a damn plant." Next story. Used to work at Tesco, got chatting about history, and he said, "Did you know that Italians used to be pale with blonde hair until the Muslims came and abused lots of them?" It was this conversation that really helped push me into actually starting my career, as I knew I couldn't take much more of opinions like that. Next story. It support years and years ago. Me. See if the application is hiding behind one of the apps on the screen. Person. No, all I see are cables. Next story. So I'm guilty of this one. But when I was in my late teens, I got a one-day agency job serving teas and coffees at a sports event. The coffees were the pre-packaged cups with either just coffee grounds or coffee grounds and milk powder, so you just added hot water for black or white coffee. After 7 odd hours of constantly serving these in a brain-dead state, a customer asked for a white coffee. I noticed we'd just run out of the white coffees, so, being the resourceful type, informed him, "We don't have any white coffees left, but I can do you a black coffee and put some milk in it." He obviously agreed with a confused look on his face. 30 seconds after he left, I realized how stupid my sentence must have come across. Next story. Getting ready to leave on my last day before a fortnight holiday. Me. That's me, folks. See you in 2 weeks. Colleague. 3 weeks as I'm off next week. Me. What the heck? Next story. When I worked in McDonald's at 17, I came in straight from college and grabbed a drink of a water. The shift leader said to me, you have to earn a drink of water. I have to earn a drink of the one substance the human body need to survive." Next story. Guy came into the pub with his underage son. Here's what followed. 2 pints of Foster's, please." "No problem. I'll just need to see the young man's ID. He's 17, but we're going to eat." Unfortunately, our company policy is that anyone wishing to drink alcohol must provide proof they are over 18, so I would be able to serve you, but not your son. The law is that if we're eating, he can have a pint? I understand that, sir, but our company policy supersedes this in this case, and we won't be able to serve your son alcohol. You're breaking the law. You clearly have no idea what you're on about. I want to speak to the manager. Next story. This guy just came back from Disneyland, or whichever one has Star Wars World, and he brought in some of the stuff he bought there. One thing was some special lightsaber he got there for a few 100 quid, was showing to someone who picked it up and said, "Wow, that's really heavy. Feels just like a real lightsaber." Next story. I work at a dental practice, and when the pandemic first hit 2 years ago, we canceled everyone's appointments and only did emergency phone referrals and consultations. We weren't furloughed, but obviously a lot of our patients were. One woman rang up for a checkup and would like to be seen before the Corona holiday ends. It still enrages me thinking about that comment. Next story. Boss. You need to organize a meeting to talk about the meeting prior to the meeting. Me. Why? Boss. So we know what the meeting is about prior to the meeting. Me. It's your meeting, and I send out all my notes beforehand to make sure everyone is up to speed. Boss. Yeah, but nobody reads that, so just organize a meeting so that we can read it all together and take out anything that makes the management team look bad. Me, boss. Cheers. Next story. Dinosaurs aren't real. They are made for entertainment in movies and stuff. Said by a qualified and working mental health nurse in charge of a ward of women detained under the Mental Health Act. Next story. Customer called up to ask why their documentation hadn't been updated with their changes. Confused, I pointed them towards the email we sent. No, what they meant was why the wording on their physical paper letter had not magically changed. Next story. Worked as desktop admin, IT, for a famous TV retailing company for a few years. So heard a few insane things, but the absolute worst was the new COO that came highly rated. He was an American who had been working Japan for a while before moving to the United Kingdom. Anyway, one morning we get a call to us from him saying his computer wouldn't power on. Get up to his office, no laptop or computer to be found in the room. Wait for him to come back and ask very carefully and politely about the issue. And he says, it's on his desk. Still couldn't see this thing. Turns out he thought the docking station was his laptop. If you've ever seen a Dell or HP docking station, you'll know they don't remotely resemble a computer. He wasn't going to go back and get his laptop, so we had to loan him one for the day. Next story. I worked in health records at a hospital for a few years, and we used loads of elastic bands when sending notes out to other departments. They refused to order more, and I quote, "There is no point ordering more because we will run out. Not sure stock replenishment is their forte." Next story. I'm a surgeon and worked in a major trauma center. I was referred a patient with compartment syndrome by a senior emergency department doctor, more senior than me. For people who aren't doctors, compartment syndrome is something that will cause you to lose the affected limb if you don't treat it quickly, and usually it's a simple, non-specialist procedure. Patient transfers always take time, usually hours. In this particular place, sometimes closer to a day. When the ED doctor tried to argue his point, I told him, either that person gets their procedure locally, or they transfer the patient over for an amputation. My sarcasm wasn't appreciated, but I felt it was very fair considering the circumstances. Next story. We had an incident where a guy fell out of the top bunk in rough weather while he was asleep. When I asked what had been done to prevent recurrence, I was sent pictures of signs that had been put up in each cabin saying, "Careful not to fall out of this bunk in rough weather." You get lots dealing with offshore work sites, but that stands out as particularly stupid. Oh, or the guy who was seen peeing off the side of the boat. No handrails, no harnesses, fairly rough weather, just standing on the very edge pissing off the side. Next story. Not heard, but seen. At an old job, we had to lock the automatic front door during windy winter days or freeze to death. So we put signs up saying go round to the right of the building to be let in the staff entrance. Bear in mind, this is back to the car park that 99% of the customers came from. The sheer amount of people who read the signs with a giant arrow on them and then walked round to the left was disturbing. Next story. I'd been on a call with a mate and changed my team's background to that image of the White House Situation Room from the Bin Laden raid for a laugh. Forgot about it, enjoyed a team meeting, and there's me sitting with Obama, Hillary Clinton, and Joe Biden. Got a couple of laughs, but had to very quickly turn video off. Next story. Work at a university and it doing, amongst other things, UX and UI. An academic, as in PhD, lecturer of undergrad, postgrad, came to me complaining that the search bar on one of our apps didn't work and he couldn't find what he needed, and thus it was garbage. I asked what search terms he used. He said he searched help. I honestly don't know how these people have managed to get to the level they're at, and have yet to understand how a search bar works. Crap. They know how a library search system works. It's like going to a library and just going up to the front desk and saying, "Book," to the librarian. Damn morons. Honestly. It wouldn't be so bad if they weren't rude and entitled to boot. Next story. I work at a cinema and frequently have customers that try and get their baby into 15 or 18 rated films and get irate when we turn them away and try and use all kinds of stupid logic. If you're under the age, you're not coming in. It's really as simple as that. Next story. Years ago, I used to work in a DVD shop. As you walked in, you were greeted by a huge sign advertising that we sold DVDs. There were cases plastering the wall and shelving full of hundreds of cases. One day a woman came into the shop, passed the sign, passed the wall and shelving, and walked up to me as I sat behind the counter. "Do you sell DVDs?" I took a moment to see if she was joking, but she was very serious. Yes, we do." Then she thanked me and walked off. Next story. Not from United Kingdom, but one time I made a point in a company meeting that we need to be able to promote, give raises, any day of the year, not just at review, to allow us to respond to people getting offers quickly enough to retain them, and the HR lady responded, "If you work here for money, maybe this isn't the place for you. Why else would we work?" It's like the definition of work. Next story. I changed a lady at McDonald's life. She got a 30-minute break. It was 1:45. She was going to come back at 2 and had been taking break the same time for months. Her manager knew. I informed her. She didn't believe me. Next story. Years ago, working in an outdoor clothing accessories shop, a woman came in and asked for something to keep her feet warm inside her boots. I started to show her our sock range, but she stopped me and said she specifically didn't want to wear socks. To this day, I don't know what she wanted me to suggest. Next story. Residential property. Tenant calls down that fridge must be faulty as her milk goes bad too quick, and she noticed that at her workplace, things stored in the fridge are generally colder. Okay, sounds interesting. Up I go. We open the fridge. Brand new, digital display, etc. And I notice that the temperature is set to 13 degrees Celsius. I tell her that this should be around 3 to 5 ideally. She says that she set it to 13 as she wanted it really cold. Okay, I tell her that to do that, she has to set it to lower temperature in, or higher, which prompts her to laugh at me and saying, "I don't know how negative numbers work." She was convinced that it's minus 13 degrees Celsius. Okay, I explain her it's positive. She doesn't believe me and says it's cold a fridge for a reason, and it always had to be minus. I point out that that's what she has a freezer underneath for, which actually freezes stuff, and also point out that her drinks, etc. would all be frozen solid if the fridge would go under 0 degrees Celsius. I'm not making this up. She still didn't believe me, so I had to Google ideal temperature for fridges and show it to her. Still in disbelief, she reluctantly agrees to set the fridge to 4 degrees Celsius, so I do just that and leave. I kid you not, within 30 minutes, she calls down that she wants an engineer to visit anyway, because even though I've set it to 4 degrees Celsius, it's still not cold. So I had to give another lesson about thermodynamics and explain why it takes time for her fully loaded fridge to reach the temperature set, and she'll need to wait, and I'll call an engineer only if it won't change in 3 to 4 hours. It was working fine, of course. I have dozens of these stories, but in most cases, people realize a lot faster that they are wrong. Next story, work in customer service for the local council. Part of my job is dealing with emergency housing repairs. Customer called with no electrics. I send the electrician, but the customer phones back a couple hours later and says the power is out again. I ask her what the electrician told her the first time round. She explains that he told her the kettle was faulty and had tripped the circuit. Okay, so did you use the kettle again? Well, yes, I wanted a cup of tea. Have also lost count of times people have told me they thought there was gas leaking from their radiator. You know, that clear wet stuff they can see coming out of the pipe that looks exactly like water. Next story. I gave a tetanus injection in AE to a 19-year-old boy who had cut his hand. Before I gave it, his mother wanted reassurances that it wouldn't give him autism from the vaccination. He was 19 years old. Next story. I work in hospitality, and I've had for staff or customers state, "Can't have eggs due to dairy intolerance." This happens a lot. Multiple times a year. You not. Mine's with skinny chicken juice. To go. Next story. I worked in hospitality for 6 years, and on 2 separate occasions in 2 different restaurants, customers ordered gammon and then proceed to ask if it was from a pig when it arrived. Turned out for religious reason, they couldn't eat anything from a pig. Not sure how you get to being a full-grown adult and not knowing that gammon is from a pig. Next story. My old boss canceled his CCTV contract. It kept an eye on his farms on the other side of the country and ripped out 20,000 pounds worth of wiring and equipment because he saw me using Google Maps. Didn't ask me, just assumed they were real-time. Walked in his office and gave the command, then, when completed, rang the company that installed it to tell them they were scamming bastards since he could get it all for free online. 2 weeks later, had to pay a further $30,000 to get it all installed again. Next story, had a woman come in to get her belly button pierced and refused to lift her top because she was shy. She thought I could just do it without looking. No idea what was going through her head. Also, I have a million stupid things asked, said to me over the years. People are strange. Next story. We were installing refrigeration cabinets into a shop. The subfloor was weak and needed to be strengthened in order to hold the weight of the cabinets plus products. One of the partners just wouldn't get it. So he's like, "What about the empty refrigeration cabinet? Will the floor support that?" Me: "So yes, it will. But once you fill the cabinet, it will be heavier, sir." Him: "No, you are mistaken. The products will be placed on shelves." Me: "Yes, the shelves inside the cabinet. The weight still goes onto the legs of the cabinet." Him: "No, the shelves take that weight." He refused to allow any modification to the subfloor, said I was trying to force him into doing extra work. After an hour of trying to explain that the shelves are not suspended in mid-air, I gave up and let him call the office to complain about my being obstructive. In the end, the sales team had to tell him that he was right, but that we had miscalculated the weight of the cabinet, and the floor would have to be strengthened just to hold even the empty cabinets. No more objection. Next story: overheard a pharmacist at work. Guy with an allergy to his cats was given an inhaler, complained it made no difference to his breathing. He was giving the inhaler to the cats. I don't know how some people make it to adulthood. Next story: a lawyer who refused to use computer screens and therefore couldn't sign a contract electronically. I still laugh when I think about the conversation I had with him. I have no idea how he does his job. Next story: the staff were playing a game to waste time before work started where you have to name all 50 USA states. But we were all working together, and a coworker came into the room, and I turned to her and said, "Oh, hey, we're just playing that game where you have to name all 50 American states." She then stopped dead in her tracks, and with a blank look on her face said, "What's a state?" Next story: I used to work in eye screening. I once did a clinic where I was sharing a building with a podiatry clinic. I had someone due on my list who was an urgent repeat. They had this test done recently and would have received a letter saying they needed their eyes tested again urgently, and they might have a problem which could cause blindness. I called for them, no answer. I assumed they hadn't shown up, very common. The next patient on the list had a similar last name to them. I brought the next patient in, and they were going on about how great it was that podiatry was here because their partner had an appointment at the same time, so they could come in together. After I saw them, someone from podiatry came round and said they had a bit of an issue. They had seen a patient on their list, but now the patient they thought they saw was outside waiting and was someone different. They were asking me if there had been some mix-up with my list of some kind. Turns out the patient meant as an urgent for me had misheard their name, went in, has their feet checked out, and left. I called them to ask them to come back in to have their eyes checked, and they said they thought they already had. I asked if they thought we checked eyes through the feet, and they said, "I don't know, it's amazing what technology can do now." They were fine, and were not going blind, and I gather their feet are in stellar condition. Next story. Oh boy, I've been waiting for this one. I've been writing these down for 3 years. I'm one of 4 sub-managers in a shop, alongside the stupidest guy I've ever met. Let's call him Marlin. Marlin has a reputation for being the store idiot. This guy believes absolutely anything he reads on Facebook is 100% true. He believes every conspiracy theory. He thinks the Earth is flat. We've never landed on the moon. Mobile phones microwave your brain. He saw that video of the woman claiming Monster is made by the devil, and he fully believes it. I once mentioned, as a crazy example to him that he shouldn't believe everything he reads, that his theories are as wild as the theory that birds aren't real, and are in fact drones used to spy on us. He considered this for a minute, and then responded with, "Okay, but I've never seen a bird up close. You can't catch a pigeon, no one ever has, so how would we know?" He then set up a trap in his garden to try and catch one to prove it was true. You, not. I was his only source of that information, said in the context of "this isn't true," and he straight away took it to be fact. He once told me, "You know Beyoncé? She sold her soul to the devil, you know. That's why she's such a good singer. She says it herself. She gets taken over by a demon called Sasha Fierce. That's why she can sing so good. She does a ritual before each gig, and it comes into her body and takes over." He thinks dinosaurs haunt tin cans. I caught him stacking tins and talking to them saying, "Stand up straight, soldiers." When I questioned him, his answer was, "Well, yeah, if you shout at them, they do it and don't fall over. They're made of metal, and that comes from the ground, and that's where all the dead stuff is, so like, the souls of dead stuff like dinosaurs and that is all in the metal, so if you tell them what to do, they listen and do it." He once stood on a spider in the stockroom and held a small funeral for it so that he didn't get haunted by its spirit. He panicked and complained to the council when they put out a 5G booster mast outside the back of the shop because he was convinced it would give us all cancer. When our manager's husband discovered he had throat cancer, Marlon went around saying, "See, it's true," despite the fact that the guy had never stepped foot near our shop, nor the mast. There was a lot more, too. So much more. Next story. A McDonald's colleague purchased cabbage instead of lettuce when we ran out once. They had been sent to the supermarket to buy some. Not really the done thing, but hey-ho. Next story. Not at work, per se, but the post office were unable to deliver a parcel because the postcode was missing. How did I know that? Because they sent me a letter telling me so, correctly addressed with my postcode. Next story. My first job at 15 in a hotel. Somehow convinced myself that helping myself to rum and cokes throughout my shift wasn't a big deal or would be noticed. Got so wasted one time and was asked to deliver a room service at the end of my shift. Could barely walk. Next story. 2 things. 1. Customer service. Back in 2008, someone calls and asks me why we advertise 60 per minute charges when they talked for 100 seconds and paid 100 pence. I didn't know how to answer that without offending the customer. Fortunately, she realized what she said and disconnected. 2. I work in a team of 2 people at work. Sometimes, when it's not busy and I have holiday to take, I take a half day off, always checking with another employee if that's okay with them. Employee had an issue with me, and every time I asked if he's okay with me leaving, which means he has to cover 2 rooms instead of 1, he would get agitated and say, "Why do you ask me? Ask the manager, I'm not your boss." Well, one day I asked the manager for a half day without asking my coworker. Literally 10 minutes later, coworker walks in and asks me if I'm okay if he takes a half day, to which I reply that I already did that. He got really agitated, turned around and left saying, "Thanks for asking." To this day, I haven't got a clue what goes on in that person's brain. Next story. An old workplace had like 4 staff members whose job for the afternoon was to manually copy and paste letters 1 section at a time, manually inputting each name and address, typos, and all. I showed them how to use mail merge, eliminating literally over 10 hours of work for the team per day. Ooh, that's not how we do things here, I was told. They were trying to defend their jobs. That was my first thought. Except, I know exactly how busy they were because I worked with them once and saw how hugely overrun they were. They'd have had busy days even if they'd managed to implement this. Next story. Probably not the most stupid, but working in data protection, you might appreciate this one. I deal with requests all day for information which is protected under GDPR guidelines. Sometimes it is third-party requests. Received one such request and go back to them with the standard spiel of, "I can't release that information without proof of identity and their signed consent." "Oh, I can't send that because of GDPR." You and me both, sister. The actual most stupid thing I was ever asked in work, out the blue from a colleague, "Is England in London?" Asked in Scotland. Next story. Twice I've had mothers tell me that their children can't have white chocolate. I do chocolate master classes, but they are fine with milk chocolate. I explained that milk chocolate contains all the ingredients that are in white chocolate, so it's not possible to be allergic to white and not milk chocolate. They insisted. I asked how they knew that their kids were allergic. One told me that her child had eaten loads of white chocolate and then felt sick. The other told me that they had been face painting using chocolate, and her child had got a finger covered in white chocolate in their eye, and it had irritated their eye. Obviously, both very smart people. Next story. I work in it. The amount of stuff that's blamed on hackers is baffling. No, Doreen, they didn't hack into your Facebook account. You gave them your username and password at some point, probably filling in some stupid online quiz about your horoscope. Next story. Worked at McDonald's during the summer break between my first and second year of uni. Shift manager calls me into the office and says, "You've only served 7 customers in the last hour." That's over 8 minutes on average to serve someone. And it's not good enough. There wasn't a constant stream of customers, and I wasn't the only one serving. So I had time between each customer, trying to make me look bad with stats that are totally wrong. She was an idiot. Next story. Worked in supermarket. Woman drove for 45 minutes in her Range Rover because she was charged £1 instead of 99 pence for a pizza. And when I looked at her funny, she said, "Well, it might not be a big deal to you, but it is to me." Next story. Small child, clear as a bell. "Daddy, I've done a massive poo and it won't flush. Different small child. Extremely loud crash, very small. Uh-oh, long silence. Me. Do you want to go and deal with that? Different small child. Mummy, can I show everyone our new puppy? Me, quick as a flash. Yes, of course you can, thank you. It was a very nice puppy. Next story. I had insane stomach cramps, and my boss called me for some trivial bull for 40 minutes. Luckily, it was only a voice call, so I muted myself, took my laptop into the toilet with me, and unleashed the most unholy diarrhea I've ever seen. I'd occasionally unmute myself for the odd, "Yep, okay," or "No worries." I just pray he couldn't hear the bathroom echoing. Next story. During a Zoom training, there was a 10-minute break during which my boss's 7-year-old daughter popped up to chat to us. She was completely naked. She runs out before the boss comes back. Luckily, he wasn't too bothered, but I did have to go back and edit the recording so I wouldn't have 5 minutes of very dubious content saved. Next story. Decided to go to the toilet mid-meeting as the agenda moved on to something I had no involvement in. Left my headphones on in case the subject changed, but forgot to mute myself. So I interrupted my team manager mid-conversation with the sound of my toilet flushing. I didn't want to find out if that was all everyone heard. Next story. Saw a colleague get changed into their cycling gear on camera. They didn't realize it was on. Not a cyclist, but not sure I was expecting him to be commando in the Lycra. Next story. There was a meeting chat open during a Teams meeting with our chief exec. Me and a couple of colleagues had a separate chat open, and another colleague joined about 15 minutes late, so asked if they'd missed anything. One colleague replied with something along the lines of, "Damn all, just the usual boring shite," to the wrong chat. Sent it to the main meeting chat. Was beautiful. Next story. Not since the pandemic, but a few years before, while working from home, I changed my name to include, "I am the greatest, get over it," as my middle name, while on a team building call to mark my success after a general knowledge quiz. Fast forward a month or so, and I connected to a company-wide call without giving my alter ego a second thought, and not even aware that the idiot everyone was laughing at on the call was me. Next story. I spend my life on Teams calls, so I have a few. 1. In company-wide Teams call, and there was an obvious toilet flush. CEO made a comment about professionalism and being on mute. 2. On a training session on Teams, and the girl presenting was rather attractive. In IM, 2 guys were discussing in graphic detail what they'd like to do to her. They were wondering if her nipples were the same color as her lips as well, I believe. They had mixed up chat windows. They both got formal warnings over that one. 3. On training, and one guy forgot he was on mute and took a long phone call where he described how boring the training was. 4. On a call with a client, and his daughter wandered in and dumped a cup of water over his lap. That one was pretty funny. Next story. That quote you heard on Teams is possibly the most honest thing that's ever been said in a work meeting. If I were HR, I'd take that comment on board as honest feedback and review my communications. Next story. Corporate training lady invited about 3,000 people to a Teams meeting to deliver some training, instead of doing the live event or some such option. The whole thing couldn't cope due to the numbers and froze, with hundreds of people in chat going, "Has it started? I can't hear anything." And as people dropped off, new people would get led into the meeting, putting, "Sorry I'm late, the system wouldn't let me in. Has it started? I can't hear anything," on repeat. It took about 25 minutes to shut the meeting down, having achieved nothing but confusion. I was flabbergasted that a corporate training person was so out of their depth at online delivery. Next story. I was one of a group of managers leading what I freely admit was a really boring team brief to about 60 colleagues on Teams. It was summer, it was warm, I had my patio doors open to my garden, I was sat on my sofa with my laptop on my lap. It came to my part of the brief, so my cam was on, and I was droning away trying to finish my bit as quickly as possible so I could turn my camera off, mute my mic, and get back to watching the cricket on the telly. Then suddenly, I hear a commotion. Loud squawking, and in bursts my border terrier, who has somehow ambushed a damn seagull and leapt onto my lap to show me his feathery prize. The call descended into a chaos of laughter and random comments like, "Is that a damn seagull? Oh, that poor bird." And my favorite, "I bet he couldn't do that to a swan." Unsurprisingly, I had to dip out the call to clean with the mess. Next story. My daughter loudly shouted, "Daddy, I've run out of toilet paper and my bum's covered in poo," from the bathroom. I had to politely excuse myself to deal with it. Next story. I was on a WebEx call with one of my team. He is in the US, and it was about 8 a.m. for him. We would often do video calls. I guess his wife wasn't expecting this to be one, as she waltzed into the background topless. I slammed down my screen and managed to power on through. Nothing was said, but it was a bit awkward for the next couple of weeks. Funnily enough, we never did a video call again. Next story. Probably me shutting my stepdaughter's face in the door while on a Teams call with my company directors and the company director, plus some support staff from our DB software developers. If I have both the bathroom and office windows open, the drat will case the door to pop open. Happened as I was in the call, so I leaned back without looking and pulled it shut. Only it didn't shut. As my stepdaughter had opened the door and stuck her head through the gap, she burst into tears. Everyone on the call felt very sorry for her, and I carried on the meeting with her sitting on my lap, giving her a hug until the point she felt better, and loudly announced, "This is boring," before wandering off. Next story. Company-wide meeting. For context, we employ 700. On Teams. One of the junior managers logged on while sitting in the office with one of his team and proceeded to say, "Look at the state of these idiots," referring to the only people with their cameras on, the senior management team. "You're not muted," was the response from one of the PAS.